All right, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Hello out there, and welcome back to the new and revived version of Ramblin With Ruddle. I am your host, all-time slow, Taylor Ruddle. If you've only been listening to me in the past kind of couple of years, you probably have no idea what Ramblin With Ruddle even was, so I'll give you a quick history lesson on that before we get into the show. It is basically the name of the little podcast interview that I launched in 2018 when I first got back to New Zealand from Japan. And I was basically just interviewing local comedians after the gigs. It was an interesting experiment, to say the least. I never put it on any of the podcasting platforms. It was only ever posted on like my YouTube page and I think my Facebook, like my comedian page or something like that. So I don't really think it got that many views. And even then, I couldn't really be sure of the quality of the views, how long people were listening for. But weirdly enough, even though I did that show for a year or so, I really dropped off when I started producing my own comedy gigs. I just didn't have the time to be editing because it was a video podcast as well. It was pretty basic. I just set up my iPhone on a little tripod, and I think I might have used my Yeti Blue in some of the episodes to capture the audio, but this was long before I knew anything about audio editing or video editing. Basically, I was going in completely blind at this point. So the quality of the show wasn't great, and I only did it for about a year, but for some reason, the name Ramblin With Ruddle has stuck. It is a great name. I think it's a fantastic name for a show. And it's to the point where people will actually still call me the Rambler, even though I haven't done the show for longer than I did the show for. So that, I guess, if nothing else, speaks to the quality of the name that I chose for my little podcast project. So what I thought I would do is we'll get into it in the episode proper, but I have been very much inspired to kind of go back to my roots a little bit and revive this Ramblin With Ruddle name. I've got the new podcast cover. I'm really happy with the podcast cover. I hope you like that too. Photo for that was taken by my good friend Jake Brown Media on Instagram. Very, very talented young man there. Sorry, no, he's Jake Brown Creative on Instagram. So you're probably thinking, well, that's all well and good, Taylor. I've caught up on the history, but why are you using this name for this podcast here? And the main thing is I just wanted to differentiate my podcast into the different brands, if you will. Like you will probably remember that I do the Ramblin With Ruddle, which is going to be from now on. I guess I'll give you the rundown on the channel of the podcast going forward. So the overall brand of the podcast is still going to be Ruddle Me This. I think that's a great name as well, despite how annoying it is to search for in the search engines. But that's going to be the overall umbrella of the show. And any of those podcast covers where you see the purple cover with the logo Ruddle Me This, that is going to be the interview show going forward. You would have probably also noticed from a couple of weeks ago my interview with Tracy Royce from the Quantum Foundation that had a swanky new Phantom Files logo and the green podcast cover. So anytime you see the green or the logo of the Phantom Files, it'll be sort of a package. That is going to be one of the spooky episodes. We'll call that the Phantom Files for short. And then what I wanted the opportunity to, for maybe on the weeks where I couldn't find a guest, I wanted to be able to do a solo podcast, as those actually do perform surprisingly well in terms of my download numbers. Any of the ones that I've released over the last few kind of weeks, where it's just been me talking to the microphone, have really exceeded my expectations in how much people downloaded them. So we thought, me, talking to myself here. So I thought what I would do is I would figure out how to have certain episodes that are just for me talking and when I don't need a guest. So the main topic that we'll get into in a little bit inspired me to kind of go back to my roots. I love the name Ramblin With Ruddle. I think that really suits the image of a guy in his living room talking to himself for like 30 minutes. And so I thought, let's see if I can come up with a cool cover artwork a few weeks ago. Knocked it all together. It came out looking really good. So I thought, yeah, let's do it. And so here we are with this is going to be sort of flavor 3 of the podcast. And then I won't say too much about it now, but I'm working on another idea for something that will be another different type of show. It'll be a little bit of a different vibe, but I think you're going to enjoy it just as much. It's all still going to be me, still going to be the same kind of production style, same kind of me talking. It's all like, I'm not doing the Babish thing where he brings in other people under his channel or anything. It's still all going to be me. It's just if you've listened to anything that I've done, you'll know how much I love color coding and having a different brand for certain items under the same umbrella. So this is all just my unique form of madness here at play. So I hope that's cleared things up a little bit and not scared you off. Nothing's really changing. You don't have to do everything. If you subscribe to Ruddle Me This, then you're going to get them all. They're literally just going to have a different podcast cover in the player, and that should hopefully let you differentiate between what kind of episode it's going to be of the week. So we'll get on to the main topic of what I wanted to talk about today, and I believe the topics that I picked were transparency, corporate greed, and capitalismo. I'm going to need to check my notes, actually. Sorry, no, it was copyright. Those are the topics I wanted to talk about today. And this is all embroiled in something that I've been following very closely over the last couple of weeks now, and it is to do with the gaming magazine called The Escapist. They had essentially an exodus of some of their staff. And that whole situation's what's kind of inspired me to do this episode. So I'll give you a bit of a rundown. So there was a gaming magazine called The Escapist. They were, I think, a literal magazine for a bit, but I think they might mainly be online journalism and videos now. And they had this content creator, I guess you'd call him, called Yahtzee Croshaw. And he would do these scathing reviews of video games. And he had this very unique style of this bright yellow background with these kind of floating limb characters. They're all very basic, white and black, kind of not quite stick people, but they, like, have you ever played Rayman or like watched those old Madness Combat videos? They have the floating limbs. That was what the art style was. And it was called Zero Punctuation, and it was a very unique thing in that, like, so Yahtzee Croshaw is the creator behind it, and he's a very fascinating guy. He used to run a website called Fully Ramblematic, which you can see why I've been thinking so much about the name Ramblin With Ruddle after that name. But he updated this thing very, very regularly and did a lot of writing, and he did articles, and he did a lot of writing, and he did that whole kind of the equivalent of the open mic circuit, I guess, for a stand-up is just he practiced his craft a lot. I have to assume he got his 10,000 hours in, and he created these two reviews for, I think it was The Darkness and Heavenly Blade, with these two PS2 games. And off the strength of those, he had pretty much the whole art style down. He had his his talking style down. It's very fast with, hence the name would describe zero punctuation. And his writing style is very cynical, very scathing, and he has this insane way of creating, similes or metaphors? I've never been good at them, so I don't know what they are, but, it'll say, this something was as crazy as a something. That's the, whatever that is, metaphor. Somehow Yahtzee's brain is just so good at coming up with these creepy, horrifying, but still completely summing up the metaphor that it's describing. You just have to watch them and check out a couple episodes of Zero Punctuation on The Escapist if you want to check that out. And so I stumbled into that when I was in high school, probably like 16 or 17 years old, and sort of followed it for a few years. I was much more into gaming then than I am now. So obviously that was quite a cool thing. You tune in every week. And before the days of content creators, it was an interesting phenomenon because I think one of the things of Queen Elizabeth dying was people were suddenly hit with this realization that a constant in their life was suddenly not there anymore. And for me, I'm approaching 31 this year. Pretty much the whole time I've been alive, so is the Queen. So that idea of this one figure in your life in the background somewhere, maybe you don't pay attention to it a lot, but then one day it's gone. That was kind of zero punctuation for a lot of us. It was just on this weekly schedule, and because it was being paid for by the Escapist magazine, he was able to do this professionally, 10 years before YouTubing was like a viable career with like AdSense and stuff like that. And I think it was just that, the Escapist paid him to create these videos and upload them to the Escapist YouTube channel. And so these zero punctuation videos performed very well for like, I think it's 16 years or 13 years. It's over 10 years for sure that he's been making these videos, in and out every week, same time every week. Like I was saying with the Queen before, that was one of the constants in our life, is you kind of assume that zero punctuation was always going to be there. And from what I gathered, zero punctuation was far and away the most popular thing on the Escapist channel for a long, long time. However, the other, I guess, character in this story was the editor-in-chief. And this editor was a fella by the name of Nick Calandra. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Nick was the editor-in-chief, so he kind of seemed to coordinate what programming was being put on the YouTube channels. And from what I had been reading, apparently under Nick's stewardship, if you will, the Escapist went from like the platform that everybody goes there for zero punctuation, and then they kind of try to get you to watch all these other things, but people don't really watch them. They're just kind of there. I guess I was going to say lost leader, but it's not a lost leader at all. But apparently under Nick, they started coming up with all these other different video series which were actually getting quite well received. Like there's one called Cold Take by a guy called Frost. There was another one that I don't know what the original name of it was, but it is called Design Delve now, and that was under another creator. And apparently, from what I've heard, like I wasn't really following the Escapist that clearly until I saw the news that happened. So the news, and this is what kicked off everything, is that Nick got fired from the Escapist, and it was your typical corporate BS of setting him these unattainable goals and then punishing him for not being able to reach these goals. And the goals were just ridiculous, but even though he could show them that the channel was experiencing growth, the other topic of today is the corporate greed, the idea that line must go up, as I've heard someone say kind of recently. And because of that, they fired Nick from the Escapist. Now, where this story gets really interesting is that due to this, evidently Nick was so good at what he did and so beloved to the team, pretty much the entire team walked out with him. There was an exodus, I believe this is called in business, which really does paint a picture of how good Nick must have been to work either under or alongside, that the whole team did not want to continue with him. I think anybody that's in a vaguely sort of leadership role can only hope to sort of aspire to be the kind of person where if you get fired, your whole team leaves with you. Another example of that I've seen people using was the Gordon Ramsay. When he left the Aubergine restaurant to create his own restaurant, you can check this out in the documentary called Gordon's Boiling Point. When he resigned, apparently his whole team came with him as well. So, interesting case here, because Gordon's known for being very shouty at his staff. But, I guess even despite all of the harsh treatment, if your whole staff is going to walk out with you when you're fired, there must be something to that. He must be doing something right to inspire them or whatever. So I found that really interesting, and then they went off to start their own company. And this is one of my favorite things that happens, is when this is where the copyright comes in, and I love when this happens. Is when somebody leaves a company, or they get fired, or for whatever reason they leave the entity that they were with, and they don't retain the rights to their copyrights, and then they get this beautiful opportunity to kind of start fresh. And there's this fantastic design challenge that comes into trying to create something that is familiar and people kind of know what to expect, but it's still different enough to get around those pesky copyright laws. So they created a company called Second Wind, which is an interesting title. I kind of like it. It's as they've pointed out, a lot of people have been making breaking wind jokes about it. So I guess what are you going to do? You've picked the name. They've picked a phoenix as their their kind of icon, which I get. Like, it's a little generic. A lot of people talk about rising from the ashes like a phoenix, and I can understand that. Like, I don't know, the branding of Second Wind is not my favorite, but I love the idea of what they've done with it and the fact that it's all going to be owned by them. And so now they've got this channel that's completely theirs. They have full control of their IP. From what I remember reading, Nick had encouraged Frost and I think the person who creates developer Delve. So I'm forgetting the name, but there's another very cool games series on the channel that definitely go and check out. I've enjoyed the couple of episodes that have dropped so far. Apparently Nick had encouraged those two to retain the rights to their creations off the bat, so they're actually able to just take them straight from the Escapist and drop them right onto Second Wind, and they've done like a bit of a refresh, like a rebrand, but they haven't had to change their name or like the gist of what the show is about. If you've listened to the show at all, you'll know that I'm a big fan of professional wrestling, and this was something that used to happen all the time in the kind of late 90s when there was WWE and WCW. What would happen is a wrestler would get fired from one company, or they would leave to go to the other company, and if they didn't retain the rights to their character or their name, they would have to change it slightly or just enough to get around the copyright laws. And even though they were essentially the same thing, like I think a big one that I remember people saying was Rhino was like RHINO on one company, and then when he went to the other company, he had to change it to Rhino, like RYNO. Sometimes even just adding a last name, like Christian. When he was in WWE, he was just one name, Christian, but then when he went back to a different company, he was able to get away with using Christian Cage, and I'm not quite sure what the legality of it is there, but that seemed to be fine. Something that's been happening a lot with WWE and AEW at the moment is wrestlers are actually getting quite savvy at trademarking their gimmick and their name and everything. So then what happens is when they leave the WWE and go to AEW or vice versa, they can actually keep their name. And for the most part, I think they can keep their kind of gear and their look. But one thing they have to change is their music. And so you get these funny situations where it's that same thing. The musician, I think Adam Cole is a great example. I think I could probably get away with playing a little bit of Adam Cole's themes here, just to give you an example of like what happened. So this was his theme in WWE. And then when he went to AEW, this was his theme.
You know it's all about the power!
So as you can see, it's very similar, but it's just different enough to get around those pesky copyright laws. I keep calling them pesky copyright laws, but I should make my stance clear on that. I'm very happy that there is such a thing as copyright as like a designer and a podcaster. And that was actually something that made me so happy to start to work alongside Plains FM in Christchurch. They're a community access radio station. If you're listening along to this, you've probably heard me mention them before. You might have even listened to my show on Plains FM at 11 o'clock on Fridays, 96.9 Christchurch radio. I assume maybe it reaches a little bit further than Christchurch. I'm not quite sure how far it goes. But we were kind of chatting as I was chatting to Pia from Plains. If you're listening, Pia, hello. Thank you for all the help you've given me. I was chatting to Pia, and we were just talking about the idea of maybe doing a radio show there. And initially, I was thinking about this idea of like, I'm gonna have to think of like a new name. I've used Ramblin With Ruddle. I've used Ruddle Me This, and like those are the only two names for a podcast that I've ever actually really liked. I've never quite found one that like aside from those two, I've never been able to find another one that I really really liked for my podcast name. Craig Westenberg suggested Puddle of Rudd, which was a good name, but not exactly the vibe I think I want for my weekly podcast. But since it's community access radio, that was one of the things that became clear to me, was that actually I could just take the brand that I've been working on, Ruddle Me This, or in this case, Ramblin With Ruddle, and I could just play it straight on the Plains FM radio station. So that was like I love the process of having to come up with something new but familiar. But I had so much on my plate at the time I was kind of talking to Planes about doing something that I just thought like, I don't have it in me to do another rebrand, and I was completely out of ideas. And I'm only sort of just now quite happy with the cover artwork for Ruddle Me This. I think if you go back and listen to some of the older episodes, it was a little bit of an early onset weirdness as I kind of found the style of the front. I'm very happy with how it looks now. The font that I'm using is Marvin. Fantastic font. I highly recommend you check it out. That was like the big thing that changed. Like I thought, okay, I've found like the identity of the brand behind the show when I found that font. So I'm very, very happy that I found it. I'm getting a little bit off topic here, but the main thing I was talking about was the Escapist turning into second wind coming out of the Escapist. And so over the last couple of weeks, I've been really excitedly watching to see how Yahtzee Croshaw has rebranded Zero Punctuation into his new show, which he's gone back to his roots once again. Big influence to inspiring me to go back to my roots and revive Ramblin With Ruddle. And so he's calling the show, he's got two shows. He's got Fully Ramblematic, and then he's got semi-ramblematic. So it took me a second to think of what those were for a second. As the Escapist, they had the copyright of Zero Punctuation because actually, interestingly enough, 16 years ago, when he first released those two reviews that got him noticed by the Escapist, those were called Fully Ramblematic reviews. So he's taken this weird 16-year side quest to do Zero Punctuation, but now he's gone back to his roots. It's all owned by him, obviously, and he's back to running a show called Fully Ramblematic. And the way he is, I should just leave a link to it in the show notes to go and check out an episode of Zero Punctuation and then check out an episode of Fully Ramblematic, because as you will tell, it's very similar. He is still using the same style of characters, although I think the initial character that he was representing him in Zero Punctuation was a little character in a fedora or a trilby. And it was drawn in a very distinctive way, and I believe that the Zero Punctuation, the Escapist had copyright of that particular little logo character. There was also something called the Imp, which was I think it was from the Darkness. It was meant to be, it was like the embodiment of one of the minions in the game, but it sort of stuck around as well, and it kind of just became one of the other characters in Zero Punctuation. And I think the Escapist retains copyright to that as well. So he had to come up with a kind of a new art style, and he's done away with the yellow backgrounds, and he's now using basically every color except for yellow. And I think the way he does it now is that the background color changes depending on what aspect of the game he's talking about. So it starts off as red. Then when he's talking about like the story, it's kind of a beige background. When he's talking about like gameplay, it turns blue. When he's talking about something else, maybe mechanics or something, it turns green. But for the most part, the overall style of it is still very much the Zero Punctuation that you know and love. So I'm very much looking forward to following it and seeing where it evolves going forward, because the interesting thing about Zero Punctuation is from that first couple of reviews, the whole style was basically there. And then I suspect it was the case of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So they kind of just continued on. He did update little bits and pieces. Like he used to do a blue screen every now and then. Certain times the background would change to blue. But for the most part, that kind of phased out, as well as some other bits and bobs that all kind of phased out as well over the years. But it did evolve, just not, it wasn't a huge change. I think the quality just kind of went up as technology got better and, you know, the resolution got higher, I guess. But I suspect a lot of the style staying the same. Can you tell? It took me a few tries to get that sentence done. You could tell that the style didn't change much. Maybe was due to the fact that it was an established brand. So I'm really looking forward to watching the evolution of these new Fully Ramblematic episodes. As you know, he's going to discover new bits and pieces, new filmmaking, new animation techniques. So I'm really looking forward to following this. And if you're a kind of branding geek like me, I recommend you check it out as well. Like I mentioned before, the other thing that Yahtzee is doing is called semi-ramblematic. And what that is going to be is, from what I can tell, I never really followed the supplementary stuff that they were putting out on the Escapist. But from what I have read, they used to have him do a couple of other projects throughout the week in order to I guess, capitalize on the fact that most people were going to the Escapist to see Yahtzee's content. So he would do something called extra punctuation, which seemed to be like an animated video that was more of a critique on the games industry, I think, than individual games. But it would have footage of video games being shown in it, whereas the zero punctuation reviews were just pictures or cartoons of bits and bobs representing the game. And this leads quite nicely into me wanting to talk a little bit about transparency, because weirdly enough, not long before this whole thing where Nick, the editor, got fired happened, I just kind of by chance was Googling zero punctuation, or I forget exactly why I was on the Escapist's page, but I noticed that there was a blog post from Nick, the editor, and I might actually read that to you now, because that could be quite a good example. Okay, here we go. I've got it up in front of me, and it says, "Hey folks, as you may have already heard, we're doing something new with Yahtzee starting this week. We've decided to end the post-zero punctuation streams as Yahtzee was personally bored with them, and who wants to watch him play through 2 hours of another Assassin's Creed game? So we decided to reformat Post-ZP as a new live stream series and edited video series called Yahtzee Unscripted." Goes on to explain the format of the show, and then it says, "We're really excited about making this switch as it will give Yahtzee a lot more time to check out a bunch of games he doesn't have time for typically because of how zero punctuation works week to week. It's probably going to take a few episodes to get the format down, so feel free to give us feedback to help us improve once we get the pilot out." And then it said, "Thanks, Nick Calandra, Editor-in-Chief." And when I read that initially, I was shocked because it was so candid and it was so honest. And this is a whole thing that I seem to be at odds with people over a lot of the time, is the idea of being honest with your audience. Like a quick example of that off the bat would be the whole idea of stand-up promoters writing, this show always books out, so book in quick, or writing, these tickets are selling fast, and it's like a third of them have sold or something. It's like that kind of thing. I used to butt heads with people a lot over doing that sort of thing when promoting shows, because it just feels dishonest to me. And I don't know, I see both sides of the coin. I understand that you have to convince people somehow, right? And it's a proven sales tactic, is the idea of false urgency with a call to action. I understand that people do this because it works, and at the end of the day, you want, if you're promoting shows, you need to put people in those seats in order for the show to happen. Otherwise, you won't have a show. But it's always just been a sticking point with me. And another, if you're a listener of mine, you'll know how upfront I am about numbers and how the shows are going and how my year went. I do those yearly State of the Ramble reviews, which a lot of people have asked me why I bother doing those, but I'll just chuck this in here as a cheeky little extra. Doing it because I was doing those self-reflection things. It was one of the reasons that David Correos asked me to come on tour with him. Excuse me, I'm clearly running out of steam. It was one of the reasons David Correos asked me to come on tour with him, is because he saw that I was very introspective, and he said to me something to the effect of, well, that means you're not going to get offended if I give you any feedback. So it does pay to be introspective. It is confronting. It is, when I was looking back at the numbers for how my Fringe show went, I was a little bit disheartened to remember that I only had something like 12 audience members on night one and 17 on night number two. But this is a tough industry, stand-up. You gotta get used to looking in the mirror if you want to get anywhere with it, right? You can't just pretend that everything's going great when it's, there's room for improvement. And so that's why I think I'm very honest with my, quote unquote, my audience. I don't know if I have an audience. I seem to have about 30 people that regularly listen to this podcast. So if you're one of them, hello, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for helping me live out the dream. And I feel like I do the same thing. I post about, another thing that gets me is when comedians cancel a gig, they always put due to unforeseen circumstances. And it's like, wow, the unforeseen circumstance you're thinking of is that you didn't sell enough tickets. And don't get me wrong, I've cancelled so many shows due to lack of ticket sales. I am no stranger to cancelling a show due to lack of ticket sales. But I mean, I'm always honest on the Facebook page. When I cancel it, I'll write, because of low sales, we had to cancel the show. I just feel like you're treating your audience kind of like idiots when you try to gloss it under the rug and due to unforeseen circumstance. Like what are you picturing? Like something from the lighting rig fell, or the hurricane came through. Like I don't know. I just don't. It feels phony to me. I don't like it. And the thing that Nick and Yahtzee have been talking about is this idea of transparency, and how corporations do not want transparency. They want to be able to drop. I mean, you've heard the phrase of corporate speak, which is the idea of saying something without actually saying anything. I guess it's the politician speak as well. Could be kind of the same ballpark there. And I understand why corporations do it. I think, especially in America with how litigious everybody is, maybe they just don't want to open themselves up to being taken to court for stuff. And I have wondered myself many a time if my constant transparency and being upfront about stuff is going to one day come back to bite me in the ass. I'm pretty careful. Like, I don't post number amounts. I'd love to do a podcast where I just talked about all the number, like how much money I made as a self-employed stand-up. But I feel like that's just inviting myself to get audited by the IRD in the following year. And while I'm not doing anything dodgy, I'm just never 100% confident that I've done anything correctly that involves like numbers or calculations and stuff like that. Thankfully, due to Henry, the app, most of that, I have so much less stress filing my taxes every year now, because I trust that their system like knows, it's all good. But that's mainly the reason why I don't ever list like actual number amounts in terms of money. Like the episode about me talking about when I went full-time as a comic, I was very careful not to use any dollar amounts, just for that reason, that I don't want to put anything in writing that I may have misspoke or remembered wrong or what have you. But other than that, I feel like I'm very honest. Like when we cancel a regular show due to lack of attendance, we always say that it's due to lack of attendance or lack of ticket sales, or that we feel like we're oversaturating the market, etc., etc. Like there are ways to do corporate speak. You don't have to just be like, well, yous guys wasn't interested in the comedy, so we's canning it. Like, you can still say like lack of interest, lack of sales. It still sounds nice, but you're still being honest with them rather than just the generic unforeseen circumstances. Because if these producers are anything like me, lack of ticket sales is not unforeseen. They have been, I tend to look at the tickets sold every single night, and that just hangs over me. One of these days, if I ever get successful enough, I definitely want to hire someone that's like a personal assistant, and their job is just to make sure like they handle all my ticket sales. And by that I mean they know how many sales have been sold for each show, and they don't tell me the number amount, because knowing the number amount drives me insane, just having it in my head. All they tell me is the show going to be cancelled or not, and like if it is, fine. I don't need to know how many tickets we sold. I just need to know that we didn't sell enough to make the show happen. And if it is going ahead, it's fine. I also don't need to know that we've only sold like half the tickets. And, I just, knowledge is a curse. No, to know is pain, is basically how I think about it. And I just don't like knowing that number in my head. Like if we have 50 tickets to sell and we sold 19 or whatever, I don't need to know that we still had another 39. God. Oh, I'm running out of steam. I actually didn't really get to the corporate greed aspect much, but now that I see we're coming up on 40 minutes, I think I'm going to call the first episode there. That's great, because I was really concerned that I wasn't going to be able to ramble on for 40 minutes to fill in a show. So I'm going to end the show there. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know. Send me a DM to my Facebook account or my Instagram account, or send me an email or something. However you can get in touch with me and let me know. Is this kind of show something you want to see more of? Do you enjoy the episodes that's just me talking kind of unfiltered to myself, essentially? I've been releasing a ton of bonus episodes in the last few weeks, but that's mainly just a Christmas thing, give you something extra to listen to over the holiday season, as well as to help me figure out the flow of how I'm going to release these things. I'm going to go back to 1 episode a week in the new year. I've got about 3 episodes of my backlog left, which once the new year is done, I'm going to start off with a Q&A episode where I answer some questions that have been submitted by friends and colleagues. If you've got a question you want me to answer, send it to me via DM to my Instagram or my Facebook page, and I'll add it to the list of questions that I answer. Or you can visit taylorruddle.com/questions to leave your question at the, a Google form. So thanks for listening. Let me know what you think of the format. Let me know if you like it. Let me know if you hate it. I just kind of want to know what your thoughts are on it and whether to do more of them or not. As always, follow me on all the social medias at Taylor Ruddle Comedy. Haven't really thought of an outro for Ramblin With Ruddle just yet, so we're just going to say thank you so much for listening. I look forward to rambling at you sometime in the future. Take it easy.